All right, everybody. Well, welcome back to session 5 in our Threat Intelligence Foundation series. I am Paul Jaramillo, Director of Threat Hunting and Intelligence at Sophos MDR.
And I'm Colin Cowie, a Senior Threat Intelligence Analyst for Sophos MDR.
Yeah, and I do want to call out some of Colin's research. You may have heard of him already, but he's done multiple presentations at Blue Hat, LabsCon, and recently over the summer at Underground Economy. So if you haven't seen his work, please check it out. And you can always find a lot of his blogging that he's contributed to Sophos at news.sophos.com. So with that, we have Colin here to talk about the cybercrime ecosystem. So today we're going to kind of step through a couple aspects of the cybercrime ecosystem and kind of inform you guys at a high level about what makes it up and what we can do about it. So to start things off, Colin, things have really matured and evolved since the early days of cybercrime. Why is ransomware the weapon of choice right now for cyber threat actors?
That's a great question, Paul. To understand why ransomware is the weapon of choice today for many criminals, let's first talk about the early days and what that looked like. In the 1980s, the United States passed the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which was really the beginning of the government's effort to crack down on potential criminal misuse and starts the emergence of the modern day efforts against fighting cybercrime as we know it. In the 1990s, there was some malware families or malware activity involving email-based viruses. This was mostly kind of people doing things to be funny or to troll internet users. It wasn't until really the early 2000s that we began to see the emergence of cybercrime as we know it. Specifically, different criminal groups at this point in time realized that they could monetize their malicious access and malware infections and create botnets and then use those botnets for further fraudulent activity. Some of the things that were common at the time included manipulating stock market tokens as well as promoting fraudulent pharmaceutical products. In the late 2000s, there was the emergence of cyber criminal forums, which it wasn't uncommon to see things like credit card information starting to be sold at that time. On the right side of the screen here, we have a screenshot of a infamous malware family called Zeus that was first emerged in the late 2000s. Sophos published research on it in 2011, and this malware family actually evolved and has some ties to modern day ransomware that I'll talk about here in a moment. In the late 2010s, cryptocurrency really further fueled internet crime and cyber crime. Malware-as-a-service began to take off, leveraging some anonymity technology like the Tor Onion browser, and cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Monero were definitely popular or gaining popularity to help further embody these criminals to commit fraudulent activity. Another type of criminal activity that I wanted to mention that was gaining more traction in the late 2010 is business email compromise. This is criminal groups gaining access to email systems and then monetizing that by manipulating or social engineering people to changing routing bank information or trying to further commit fraudulent activity. Now in the 2000s and 20s and where we're at today, we've really seen the full professionalization of cybercrime. Furthermore, the main criminal activity or criminal monetization technique that we see today is data theft extortion, where threat actors not just gaining access and to deploy ransomware, but also exfiltrating data and then leveraging that data to further victimize the organization or to extort them into paying a ransom. Additionally, we've seen new attack surfaces emerge over the past decade, such as cloud services and criminal groups that have found ways to target those different cloud services providers to gain additional monetary funds through cryptocurrency mining or other fraudulent techniques. Now let's discuss more about why ransomware is popular among so many different criminals today. The first thing I wanted to note is that there is a low barrier to entry. These different ransomware as a service groups advertise their services on criminal forums, and it reduces the cost for a maliciously motivated individual to gain access to start to carry out these intrusions. The other reason why it's popular today is the high potential profitability. For a low fee or low initial entry cost to bury, you can potentially carry out a ransomware incident that could cause millions in damages. Additionally, cryptocurrencies and anonymity technology enables these criminal groups to perform their actions with additional confidence that is compounded by a limited risk of apprehension in some countries. There are certainly other places in the world where being a ransomware operator is not looked down upon as much as in Western countries where it is very much illegal. And finally, the last reason why ransomware is popular is because people actually pay the ransomware. If no one paid the ransomware, there would be a lot less of a market and less criminal groups that were performing this activity.
Yeah, so Colin, that was an excellent run through, and I think we understand why ransomware has been so successful. And of course, you did touch on that it's matured. So maybe can you walk the audience through the current ecosystem and the different roles of the cyber threat actors?
Certainly. In the current cyber criminal ecosystem, we divide it into three specific roles. The first role is developers. These are people who are actually developing the malware or ransomware strands. The second role is the operators. These are people like ransomware affiliates or threat actors who are leveraging phishing kits to actually perform the primary hands-on keyboard intrusion activity. And the last major category that we have is administrators. These are people in charge of actually running the groups, coordinating different activity, recruiting affiliates, advertising services, and of course, there are certainly situations where one specific person does multiple of these roles themselves or just two of these roles. One real-life example of a cyber criminal group is the Conti ransomware gang. Last year, the UK National Crime Agency published some more information about the personas of this infamous group. This group was involved with running the Conti ransomware-as-a-service, which extorted organizations all over the world and was in a group that did not just data encryption, but also data theft. Within the Conti ransomware group, there are certainly different roles and different specialties among their members. The first group that we mentioned earlier from the last slide, operators, there were different affiliates that were involved with actually monetizing access to these networks, escalating their access from just user credentials to a full domain administrator access, and then ultimately exfiltrating and deploying ransomware. Additionally, there were developers. These were people who specialized in maintaining the malware that was leveraged to perform these intrusions, specifically the TrickBot malware family, as well as the Conti ransomware. Additionally, we also classify the IT administrators or folks that manage the malicious infrastructure as developers, as they're primarily a supporting development type role. And lastly, there are the administrators who are involved in actually running the group and coordinating the group's activities.
Yeah, that's great because that really drives home the point. These are people behind a keyboard that are doing this. It's the person that's the threat. And also the maturity, breaking them down into the different roles in an organizational structure. So great walkthrough, Colin. Certainly we know a lot about Conti potentially because of the data leaks. Can you talk about, the role that leaks have played and how maybe they've shifted the ecosystem a bit?
Certainly, that's a great point. Data leaks have played a very interesting role in understanding the evolution of the cyber criminal industry. Sometimes data leaks are from disgruntled affiliates or members of a gang that then leak files about their former co-partners. Sometimes these leaks may be from security researchers, and in other times, these leaks may be actually from the groups themselves sharing information to further complicate attribution. So just to recap about data leaks and the role that they play within the cyber criminal ecosystem and how they influence the research of cyber criminal activity, they definitely provide unique insight into the techniques and inter-team operations of these criminal groups. They also provide insight into counterintelligence efforts that these groups take to combat the research that malware researchers and threat intelligence professionals take and against these groups. And then lastly, they help us understand general patterns of the adversary's activities. Another point that I really wanted to highlight about data leaks is that there is a diversity in sources. I mentioned this earlier, but sometimes these can be from poor operational security, where the criminal groups accidentally expose information that can be further researched. Other times it could be due to a disgruntled relationship between different criminal actors. And then lastly, there have been times where security researchers have published in-depth information about the different criminal groups that they have been researching. And the final takeaway about the impact of data leaks is that they have been both helpful and harmful. Helpful in the sense that for defenders like myself, we can understand more about the criminal group. But unfortunately, there have been times like with the Lockbit ransomware builder where the leak of source code has enabled other criminal groups to further perform malicious activity without having to potentially develop tools or pay for additional tooling. And then lastly, it definitely can complicate threat attribution and make life for threat intelligence professionals a little bit more challenging when things are out there publicly and techniques become more broad as opposed to being a more specific technique.
Yeah, so I think we see how bad the problem is. And even though there have been some notable disruptions, what are some steps we can take to kind of collectively combat this cybercrime threat?
There are three things that we recommend for combating cybercrime and ransomware. The first thing that I wanted to highlight was around responding to malware infections. In most ransomware incidents, there are indications of malicious activity prior to ransomware being deployed. This could be something like a malware infection, such as an information stealer, or it could be the deployment of tools that are used to further gain malicious access to domain administrator credentials. If you're responding to an infection and you feel like things have gotten out of hand, we certainly recommend reaching out to professionals. The Sophos Incident Response Services team is available to get immediate help to active cyber attacks, and we certainly suggest reaching out if you are dealing with an incident. The second main recommendation that we have is around reporting incidents. If unfortunately you are the victim of a ransomware incident, we recommend reaching out to local authorities and reporting the incident so that way the government can track and understand how much of a problem this is. If your business is based out of the United States, you can go to the Internet Crime Complaint Center online to report an incident. And the final recommendation that we have for combating ransomware and cybercrime is to avoid paying cyber criminals. There are certainly different business considerations that you have to make, but as a threat intelligence analyst, I encourage everyone to avoid paying ransomware. Paying the ransomware really enables these criminal groups to continue funding development of their malware, continue to recruit other malicious motivated individuals, and continue to operate. So if possible, please do not pay the ransomware. That has been the Cybercrime Overview, Threat Intelligence Foundations. Thank you so much for attending.
Yeah, great work, Colin. I think that really gave the audience some insight into the different components of the cybercrime ecosystem. And I think at a minimum with his recommendations, which were solid, at a minimum, please report and share your indicators. I think that does the community a service by facilitating those disruptions as well as helping out your peer organizations. So we would appreciate that. If you did like the session, please like and subscribe to the channel. Also comment if there's any content that you'd like to see, and we can take a look at that. Last up, we will have session 6 focused on geopolitics and nation states. So please stay tuned, and thank you so much for attending. Thank you.